He woke up early that morning, the sunlight streaming through the thin curtains of his small apartment. There was a calm in the air, almost like the city itself was holding its breath. Today was not just any day. It was a day he had been planning for a long time. For weeks, he had observed the designer store from across the street, taking note of every detail. He had watched the people who came and went, the way the employees interacted with customers, and most importantly, how the owner treated everyone who walked through the doors. There had been rumors, whispers in the city, that the owner had a tendency to favor certain customers while dismissing others. He had heard it all before, but now he wanted to see it with his own eyes. He dressed carefully, choosing clothes that would make him blend in without drawing attention. Nothing too flashy, nothing too plain. He wanted to look like someone who belonged, someone who could walk through those doors without anyone suspecting anything. He had a small notebook in his pocket and a pen tucked inside his jacket, ready to jot down observations. More importantly, he had his phone ready to record if things went wrong. He knew he had to be careful. This wasn't just about proving a point. It was about documenting the truth. As he approached the store, his heart beat a little faster. The building was sleek and modern, with large glass windows that displayed mannequins dressed in expensive clothing. The logo above the entrance gleamed in the sunlight, a symbol of wealth and exclusivity. People were walking in and out, some carrying shopping bags, others just browsing. He took a deep breath and stepped inside. The interior was even more impressive than the outside. Soft music played in the background, the kind that made people feel relaxed and calm. The floors were polished to a shine, reflecting the soft lights from above. Clothes hung neatly on racks, each item carefully arranged to catch the eye. There were shoes, bags, and accessories displayed like treasures in a museum. It was clear that no expense had been spared in creating an atmosphere of luxury. He walked slowly, taking it all in. He moved from rack to rack, pretending to look at the clothes while observing the employees. Most of them greeted customers politely, smiling and offering assistance. But there was something about the way they looked at him that felt different. A subtle hesitation, a slight frown, a whisper exchanged with another employee. He felt it in the air, a quiet tension that made his skin prickle. Then he saw the owner. He was standing near the back of the store talking to one of the employees. He was a tall man, impeccably dressed, with an air of confidence that bordered on arrogance. His eyes scanned the room, and when they landed on him, he paused. The smile faded from his face, replaced by a look that was almost contemptuous. It was brief, but it was enough for him to feel the shift in the atmosphere. He continued browsing, pretending to examine a jacket. The owner watched him for a moment longer, then turned away as if deciding he wasn't worth his time. But the damage was done. The subtle tension in the air grew heavier. He felt the eyes of the staff on him, the way they whispered and glanced his way. It was uncomfortable, but he had expected it. This was exactly what he had come to see. He moved toward a display of shoes, crouching slightly to get a better look. One of the employees approached him, a young woman with a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Can I help you find something?" she asked. He shook his head, smiling politely. "Just looking, thank you." She nodded and stepped back, but he could see the way she kept glancing at him, the way she adjusted her posture as if preparing for something. It was subtle, almost invisible to anyone else, but he noticed. Every gesture, every movement was a clue. He spent the next several minutes moving through the store, pretending to browse, observing every interaction. He watched as other customers were greeted warmly, offered drinks, and even small discounts. He watched the difference in treatment, the invisible barrier that seemed to exist between him and the level of service others received. It was subtle but unmistakable. Finally, he decided it was time to approach the owner. He walked calmly toward the back of the store, where the man was now arranging some items on a shelf. "Excuse me," he said politely, trying to keep his tone neutral. "I was wondering if you could help me with something." The owner looked up, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice clipped. "Yes," he replied, keeping his voice steady. "I'm interested in this jacket. Could you tell me more about it?" The owner's expression didn't change, but there was a slight edge to his tone. "Of course. That jacket is one of our latest arrivals. The material is imported, handcrafted, and comes at a premium price." He nodded, pretending to examine the fabric. "It's very nice. Could I try it on?" The owner's eyes flicked around the store as if searching for an excuse. I'm afraid we have a policy about who can try on certain items, he said, his voice tight. He raised an eyebrow. I see. Is that a policy for everyone? The owner hesitated, and in that moment he saw the truth. There was no policy. This was about him. The subtle judgments, the whispered comments, the hesitation, all of it pointed to one thing: he was being singled out. He smiled politely, keeping his voice calm. I understand. Thank you for your time. He turned to leave, but the owner stepped in front of him. I think it would be best if you left, he said firmly. We don't allow certain customers in this section of the store. He paused, surprised by the outright rudeness. I'm sorry, I don't understand, he said. I'm willing to follow any rules. The owner shook his head, his expression hardening. I said you need to leave now. He felt a mix of emotions, anger, disbelief, and a quiet satisfaction. He had expected this. He had anticipated the humiliation, the prejudice, and the injustice. He nodded slowly, keeping his calm, and walked toward the exit. As he stepped outside, he took a deep breath, letting the sunlight wash over him. The city sounded different out here, sharper, more alive. Once outside, he pulled out his phone and checked the recording. Every interaction had been captured, every word, every expression. He smiled faintly. This was not just about proving a point, it was about holding someone accountable. About showing the world that actions have consequences and that discrimination could no longer hide behind polite words and shiny surfaces. He walked down the street, thinking about what to do next. He knew the power of social media, of public awareness. He knew that once this story was shared, people would see the truth. He felt a quiet determination building inside him. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice, about making sure that the small, everyday acts of prejudice were exposed and challenged. As he moved further from the store, he watched the people around him. They went about their day, unaware of the drama that had just unfolded inside the designer store. Some smiled, some frowned, some were lost in their own thoughts. Life moved on, but he knew that tomorrow it would be different. The story was only beginning, and he was ready for what came next. He found a bench nearby and sat down, reviewing the footage once more. The owner's arrogance, the subtle dismissals, the whispered comments, it was all there. He made notes in his notebook, careful to record every detail. Each observation was a piece of a larger picture, a picture of inequality and injustice that so many preferred to ignore. He felt a quiet sense of responsibility. This story needed to be told, and he was the one to tell it. The afternoon sun warmed his face as he continued to sit there, thinking through the next steps. He planned to share the story strategically, to make sure the message was clear and reached the right audience. It wasn't about shaming one man. It was about shining a light on behavior that had gone unchecked for too long. He imagined the reactions, the support, and even the outrage that would follow. It was a small act, but it had the potential to spark a conversation, to make people think about how they treated others. As the day drew on, he felt a sense of calm resolve. He had faced the uncomfortable reality, documented it, and now the rest was in motion. The store, the owner, and the people inside had revealed their true colors, and the world would soon see them too. He stood up, folded his notebook, and slipped it into his jacket. With one last look at the store, he walked away, ready to take the next step in turning this moment of injustice into something meaningful. The next day, he woke with a sense of determination. The events of yesterday were still fresh in his mind. The way the owner had dismissed him without reason, the subtle glares and whispers. He knew he had to act carefully, but he also felt a quiet anger, a need to make sure the truth was seen. He prepared himself in the same careful way he had the day before, choosing clothing that would not draw attention, simple and understated. He wanted to be just another person walking into the store, nothing more, nothing less. He left his apartment and walked toward the designer store, the morning air cool against his skin. People moved quickly around him, the city already buzzing with life. He kept his head low, eyes scanning the street, aware of every detail. When he arrived, the store looked the same as yesterday, polished and shiny, with people entering and leaving in a steady flow. But he noticed something different. There was a quiet tension, almost invisible, in the way the employees moved. He knew it was too early for the chaos that would come, but he could feel it, a subtle shift in the air. He entered the store calmly, as if he had no reason to be cautious. The interior was just as luxurious as he remembered, with soft music playing and lights reflecting off the polished floors. He walked slowly, observing the staff. Their eyes flicked toward him more than before, hesitant, unsure. The owner was not visible yet, and he took a moment to let the employees notice him, to see their reactions without saying a word. He moved with purpose, pretending to browse the racks. But every step was deliberate, every glance calculated. He stopped near a display of jackets, running his fingers lightly over the fabric, pretending to examine it. He could hear whispers from the employees, hushed voices, almost like a secret conversation he wasn't meant to hear. A young woman who had approached him the day before came over again, her smile tight, a little forced. "Can I help you with anything?" she asked. He shook his head. "No, thank you. Just looking." She hesitated, glanced toward the back of the store where the owner often stood, then stepped away. He noticed the subtle tension in her shoulders, the way she kept glancing at him as if expecting something to happen. It was exactly what he had hoped to see, the unease, the uncertainty that revealed the truth of their behavior. Moments later, the owner appeared from the back, tall and imposing, dressed in the same impeccable clothes. His eyes landed on him immediately, and this time the look was not just fleeting. It was a glare, sharp and deliberate. The owner took a step forward, moving as if to block his path. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone clipped and commanding. He looked up at him, keeping his voice calm. "Yes, I was interested in seeing some of your jackets. Could you tell me more about this one?" The owner's expression hardened. "I've already told you yesterday that certain customers are not allowed in this section," he said, the words cold and cutting. "Perhaps you should leave before this gets uncomfortable." He felt a flash of anger, but he kept his voice steady. "I understand, but I'm just trying to look. I mean, no harm." The owner's jaw tightened. "I said leave now." He shook his head slowly. "I'm not leaving until I understand why. Is it because of me or because of something I did?" The owner's eyes narrowed, and for a moment it seemed as if he might respond. But then he turned away, muttering under his breath, clearly frustrated. "This is ridiculous," he said, his voice low, not meant for anyone else to hear. He could see the anger in the owner's body language, the way his shoulders stiffened, the way he clenched his hands. It was all a reaction to him standing firm, refusing to leave quietly. He continued to browse, pretending to examine the jackets, taking note of every interaction. The employees watched him closely, some avoiding eye contact, others whispering to each other. He noticed a young man who usually helped wealthy customers approaching, pausing, unsure if he should intervene. The discomfort was palpable, and it was exactly what he had hoped to witness. He stayed calm, speaking politely when addressed, asking simple questions about materials and sizing, keeping the tone neutral but deliberate. Finally, the owner's patience snapped. He stepped forward, placing a hand firmly on a rack of clothes. "That's enough," he said sharply. "You need to leave immediately. If you don't, I'll call security." He held up his hand, signaling he meant no trouble. "I'm leaving," he said quietly. "But I want you to know that your behavior is being recorded." He pulled out his phone, holding it casually, making sure it was visible. The owner's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of fear passing over his face. He could see the realization settling in, the fact that his actions were no longer private, no longer hidden behind a polished facade. As he walked toward the exit, he kept the phone in view, moving steadily and confidently. The employees parted, some with relieved expressions, others with curiosity. He could feel the tension in the air, the shift from casual indifference to nervous awareness. The owner followed him with his gaze, his face flushed, his posture rigid. He could almost hear the wheels turning in the man's head, trying to figure out how to control a situation that was now completely out of his hands. Outside, he took a deep breath, letting the air wash over him. The city felt alive, the sounds sharper, the light brighter. He walked down the street, keeping his phone ready, thinking carefully about the next steps. He knew that public exposure was the most powerful tool he had, that sharing this story would not only reveal the prejudice, but also hold the owner accountable in a way that private confrontation could never achieve. He found a quiet cafe nearby and sat down, pulling out his notebook and reviewing the footage. Every interaction, every word, every expression was captured. The owner's arrogance, the subtle dismissals, the nervous glances of the employees, all of it formed a clear pattern. He took notes, careful and methodical, documenting everything he had seen and experienced. This was more than a story. It was evidence. He began to draft a post for social media, choosing words carefully. He wanted to convey the truth without exaggeration, to show what had happened clearly and honestly. He wrote about the experience, the way he had been treated, and the reactions of the employees. He described the owner's behavior without name-calling, focusing on actions rather than insults. His tone was calm, factual, but with an undercurrent of the injustice he had faced. He knew that authenticity was more powerful than anger, that people would respond more to truth than to outrage. After finishing the draft, he reviewed it several times, making sure it was clear and precise. Then he added the video clips, each one carefully trimmed to show key moments. The post was ready. He hesitated for a moment, feeling the weight of what he was about to do. Once it went live, it could not be undone. But he knew it was necessary. The story needed to be told not just for him, but for anyone who had ever faced discrimination and felt powerless. He hit post and watched as the notifications began to appear. Within minutes, comments started coming in, people expressing support, sharing similar experiences, and encouraging others to see the truth. The post began to spread quickly, the reach growing with every passing moment. He felt a sense of quiet satisfaction, knowing that the injustice could no longer remain hidden. Back at the store, he imagined the scene, the owner checking his phone, seeing the post. Realizing that his actions were now public knowledge, he pictured the panic, the embarrassment, and the sudden awareness that he could no longer control the narrative. The employees, too, would see the response, and the discomfort they had felt yesterday would now be compounded by the public attention. He sat in the cafe, sipping his coffee, and allowed himself a moment of reflection. He had faced the prejudice, stayed calm, documented the truth, and shared it with the world. The next steps were out of his hands, but he knew that the story would have an impact. People would take notice, conversations would start, and the owner would have to face the consequences of his actions. As the day went on, he watched the post gain traction, comments pouring in from all directions. People shared their own experiences, offered support, and expressed outrage at the behavior he had exposed. The story was no longer just about him. It had become a symbol of accountability, a reminder that actions have consequences and that standing up for oneself could inspire others to do the same. By the evening, he felt a sense of calm resolve. He had taken the first steps in exposing the truth, and the world was starting to respond. The store, the owner, and everyone involved would now have to reckon with what had been revealed. He closed his notebook, packed his things, and left the cafe, walking through the city streets with a quiet confidence. He knew that justice could take time, but the momentum had begun, and there was no turning back. The next morning, he woke up to a quiet city, the streets not yet filled with the usual hustle and bustle. His phone buzzed with notifications, the social media post from the previous day already spreading further than he had expected. Comments poured in from people he had never met, sharing stories of their own experiences, offering encouragement and expressing outrage at what he had gone through. It was overwhelming, but in a way that brought clarity. The story was no longer just his. It had become a shared experience, a mirror reflecting the reality of discrimination that many faced. He prepared himself for the day, careful to dress simply, blending into the flow of the city. Today was not about confrontation. It was about observing, understanding, and letting the consequences of yesterday's exposure unfold naturally. He knew the owner of the store would be aware of the post by now. He imagined the reactions, the unease, and the sudden realization that private actions had become public knowledge. As he walked toward the store, he noticed the subtle differences in the environment. Delivery trucks had started lining up along the street, the staff moving more hurriedly, their conversations quieter and more tense. The atmosphere that once felt casual and polished now carried a weight of unease, almost electric in its intensity. He kept his distance at first, observing quietly, taking in the scene. Inside the store, he saw the owner pacing back and forth, clearly unsettled. The polished confidence that had defined his posture yesterday was replaced with tension, tight shoulders, and a strained expression. He could see him glancing at his phone repeatedly, likely reading the comments and seeing the post spread. There was a shift in the store's energy, a quiet chaos beneath the surface. Employees whispered among themselves, glancing at the owner, unsure how to proceed. He remained outside, casually observing. People had started arriving, Not just regular customers, but others who had seen the post online. Some stopped in front of the store, taking pictures or recording video, while others walked away, clearly protesting by refusing to enter. The ripple effect of the story was immediate, and it fascinated him. What he had started as a quiet act of observation and documentation had now triggered something much larger. Inside, the owner's frustration grew. He attempted to manage the situation, speaking to employees sharply, demanding explanations, trying to restore a sense of control. But the control he sought was slipping through his fingers. Deliveries had started piling up, some delayed, some refused, as news of the post spread to suppliers and vendors. He could see the strain in the owner's interactions, the way his attempts to command respect were met with nervous compliance or subtle resistance. Outside, he moved slowly down the street, watching the reactions of passers-by. People stopped to look at the store, some shaking their heads, others taking photos. The post had reached far beyond his initial expectations, and the consequences were becoming tangible. He could feel a quiet satisfaction, not from revenge, but from witnessing accountability in action. Hours passed, and the store became a focal point of attention. Local news outlets picked up the story, journalists arriving with cameras and microphones wanting to speak with the owner or the employees. The owner tried to maintain composure, stepping outside to speak, but his words fell flat against the growing narrative of the post. He realized that the story had taken a life of its own, beyond the control of one person's ego. He found a bench across the street and sat down, observing everything with careful attention. The reactions of people, the tension in the store, the staff's nervous glances, all provided a deeper understanding of the consequences of unchecked prejudice. The story that had started as a simple act of witnessing had become a larger lesson in human behavior, societal norms, and accountability. Throughout the day, he received messages from strangers who had seen the post, thanking him for speaking up, sharing their own experiences and offering support. It was humbling and empowering at the same time. The collective response of the community had created a force that no single individual could ignore, and it reinforced his belief that standing up against injustice was never futile. As evening approached, he noticed changes within the store itself. Customers had dwindled, many refusing to enter, some leaving in mid-shopping once they realized the nature of the story. The store's usually polished appearance felt tense, almost strained, as though the walls themselves held the weight of the situation. The employees moved carefully, their interactions with each other cautious and deliberate. He continued observing, making small notes in his notebook, documenting the unfolding events. Every interaction, every subtle gesture told a story of human behavior under pressure. The owner's attempts to regain control were failing. Each action met with resistance, either subtle or overt. It was a demonstration of the consequences that followed when prejudice met exposure and accountability. Finally, as night fell, the street quieted. The store remained, a symbol of the day's events, the story still circulating online, continuing to gather attention. He stood up from the bench, reflecting on the day. What had begun as a personal experience had evolved into a public lesson, a moment where truth and accountability intersected in a way that was powerful and undeniable. He walked home slowly, the city lights casting long shadows across the streets, the weight of the day pressed gently on his shoulders, but it was a weight born of purpose and resolution. He had witnessed, documented, and shared a moment of injustice, allowing it to spark awareness and conversation. The world had responded, and the ripple effect of his actions would continue to unfold in the days to come. By the time he reached his apartment, he felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. The story was no longer just his. It belonged to the community, to those who had seen it and spoken out, to those who had faced similar situations and found validation in his courage. The city felt different now, alive with the knowledge that standing up against injustice could create real, tangible consequences. He settled into his apartment, reviewing the day's notes and footage once more. The impact was clear, and he understood that his role in the story was only the beginning. The reactions, the dialogue, and the awareness generated were already creating change, and that change had the potential to extend far beyond the walls of a single designer store. As he prepared for the next day, he felt a calm determination. The story was not over, and he knew that further developments would unfold, each moment adding to the larger narrative of accountability and truth. The sense of empowerment, both personal and communal, stayed with him, a quiet reminder that standing firm in the face of injustice could ignite a force that no one could ignore. The next morning, the city felt unusually quiet, a calm that seemed almost fragile, as if the world itself was holding its breath. He walked toward the designer store, noticing the subtle changes in the street. Delivery trucks were lined up outside the store, some waiting, some honking in frustration. The employees moved quickly inside, their faces tight with anxiety. The store, once a model of sleek efficiency, now seemed tense and chaotic, almost on the verge of collapsing under the weight of the day's events. From across the street, he observed the owner pacing near the entrance, his tailored suit and polished shoes unable to hide the tension radiating from him. He was on his phone, speaking sharply, clearly frustrated. The calm confidence that had defined him was gone, replaced by desperation. He was trying to regain control, but the viral post from the previous day had reached everyone connected to the store, including suppliers and delivery companies. The delivery company outside had refused to unload a large shipment of new items until the store addressed certain compliance and safety issues. The owner argued, but the drivers were firm, insisting that the rules had to be followed. His frustration grew with each passing minute, the carefully maintained image of control starting to crumble. He could see employees shifting nervously, unsure how to respond or whether to intervene. People began to gather outside the store, drawn by the story spreading across social media. Some stopped to watch, taking photos and recording videos. Others had seen the post online and were there to witness the situation firsthand. The once polished street now felt charged, alive with tension. The store's usual aura of exclusivity and calm had been replaced by uncertainty and public scrutiny. Inside, the employees were tense. Whispers passed between them, glances exchanged. Even simple tasks like arranging clothing or assisting customers were now fraught with stress. They moved carefully, aware that every action was being watched, both by the public and by the cameras that journalists had set up outside. The owner barked orders, trying to regain control, but his voice was tight and strained. Each directive seemed only to increase the sense of chaos. Outside, journalists arrived with cameras and microphones, eager to capture the unfolding story. They asked questions to both the owner and the employees, documenting the tension and the disruption. The owner's responses were sharp, defensive, and often contradictory. The public pressure and the viral spread of the story had rendered his attempts at maintaining authority ineffective. The employees were caught in the middle, trying to follow orders while navigating the scrutiny of onlookers and reporters. He continued observing, recording events on his phone and taking detailed notes. Every interaction, every subtle gesture, every frustrated movement added to the story he had started. The consequences of prejudice and discriminatory behavior were now real, tangible, and unavoidable. The delivery trucks remained, blocking the entrance, creating a logistical nightmare. Customers who arrived either left immediately or lingered cautiously, aware of the unfolding situation. By late afternoon, the tension had escalated. The owner was forced to speak to both the delivery drivers and the gathering crowd, his words falling flat against the overwhelming attention. Employees moved with precision but showed clear signs of discomfort and stress. The once controlled environment was now a scene of accountability, exposure, and public scrutiny. Each action, each reaction reflected the consequences of arrogance and discriminatory behavior. He watched as the day wore on, the store unable to function normally. Every movement, every word, every glance was a testament to the ripple effects of what had started as a personal act of documentation. The public, the employees, the delivery personnel, and the journalists had all become part of the unfolding narrative, amplifying the consequences of the owner's actions. As evening approached, the crowd outside continued to grow, the media presence increasing. The owner's attempts to regain control became more frantic and visible, his frustration evident. Employees navigated the environment carefully, aware of both public scrutiny and the owner's temper. The tension inside and outside the store created a tangible pressure, a living example of accountability in action. By nightfall, the street had become a stage where the owner's previous behavior and the prejudice he had shown were exposed to the world. The delivery trucks still blocked the entrance, the crowd outside remained vigilant, and journalists continued to document every moment. The story that began as a personal experience had evolved into a public lesson about accountability, justice, and the consequences of discrimination. He walked home slowly, reflecting on the day. The owner had been exposed, his carefully maintained image shattered. Employees, while anxious, had witnessed the power of truth and public awareness. The ripple effect of the viral post had transformed a private act of injustice into a public lesson, demonstrating the strength of standing up against discrimination. Sitting quietly in his apartment, he reviewed the footage and notes from the day. Every detail told a story of human behavior under pressure, of accountability, and of the power of exposure. The events had reached their climax, but he knew the impact would continue. The awareness sparked by the day's developments would ripple outward, reinforcing the lesson that actions, no matter how small or hidden, carry consequences. The story had become a living example of justice, responsibility, and the power of speaking truth to power. The morning sun streamed through the windows, casting long, warm rays across the city streets. He woke with a sense of calm purpose, reflecting on the events of the past few days. The viral post, the confrontation, and the public attention had all set in motion a series of consequences that were still unfolding. Today, he knew, would reveal the lasting impact of his actions and the broader lesson about justice and accountability. He left his apartment, walking slowly through the quiet streets. People moved around him, some aware of the story circulating online, others unaware of the unfolding drama at the designer store. The city felt alive, but the energy was different, charged with the knowledge that standing up against injustice could trigger real consequences. He carried with him his phone and notebook, ready to document the day, aware that the story was far from over. As he approached the store, he noticed immediate changes. The usual sleek, polished appearance of the building seemed less imposing. The delivery trucks that had blocked the entrance yesterday were gone, but the front doors were closed and a few employees peered out cautiously. The owner, visibly tense, was outside speaking to someone on the phone. His posture, once tall and confident, now seemed rigid and tight, weighed down by the events of the past day. The aura of arrogance that had defined him was replaced with visible anxiety and strain. He observed quietly from across the street, noting the reactions of employees and passers-by. The staff appeared exhausted, moving slowly, carefully, aware that the world was watching. The story had reached a point where accountability was no longer abstract. It had become immediate, tangible, and unavoidable. The public attention, combined with logistical complications and supplier concerns, had forced the store to confront the reality of its actions and treatment of customers. As the day progressed, a small crowd gathered outside the store. Some were curious onlookers, others supporters of the message that had gone viral. Their presence created a silent pressure, a reminder to the owner that his actions were no longer private. Cameras and phones were raised to capture every movement, adding to the sense of public scrutiny. He noticed the owner's repeated attempts to calm the situation, speaking to the crowd, gesturing to employees, and checking messages on his phone. Each effort seemed to highlight the ongoing consequences rather than resolve them. Inside the store, employees navigated the space cautiously. They moved with precision, completing tasks slowly, aware of both the crowd outside and the internal tension. Their interactions with one another were subdued, marked by careful glances and hushed whispers. The owner attempted to manage them, but his authority had been undermined. The viral post had created a ripple effect, turning the once polished store into a site of public accountability and visible consequences for prejudice. He observed the interactions between the owner and the delivery company, who had arrived with new instructions and required compliance documents. The owner's frustration was evident as he argued, trying to negotiate, but the company insisted that protocols be followed. The balance of power had shifted, and for the first time the owner's attempts at dominance were met with firm resistance. He watched every gesture, every expression, noting the subtle signs of realization, embarrassment, and fear. The small crowd outside continued to grow, though they remained respectful, their presence a quiet form of support and observation. People shared their thoughts, some speaking softly to friends, others recording or taking notes. The attention created a feedback loop. The more public scrutiny, the more the owner's stress and the employee's caution. He could see the human cost of the day's events, the ways in which accountability affected everyone involved. By mid-afternoon, the store began to slowly reopen, but the energy inside was changed. Customers moved hesitantly, aware of the story and the attention surrounding the location. Employees greeted people with politeness, but there was a new awareness, a subtle shift in tone that reflected lessons learned and the presence of consequences. The owner's attempts to maintain control were careful, calculated, and visibly strained. Every word, every action, carried the weight of the prior incidents. He noticed small changes that indicated accountability. The owner speaking respectfully to staff, asking for compliance updates and addressing concerns he had previously ignored. Employees responded with professionalism but also with subtle relief, the tension of unchecked prejudice easing slightly. The ripple effects of the viral post had catalyzed a process of reflection and adaptation, forcing change that might not have occurred otherwise. Outside, members of the public lingered, some stopping to ask questions, others simply observing. The story had evolved from a personal act of documentation into a broader narrative about justice, awareness, and the consequences of discrimination. People spoke about fairness, equality, and responsibility, reinforcing the impact of standing up against wrongdoing. The presence of witnesses and support created an environment where accountability was visible and undeniable. Throughout the day, he continued to document events, recording interactions, taking notes, and observing behavior. The contrast between the store's previous arrogance and the current tension was clear. He saw moments of embarrassment, genuine reflection, and subtle attempts at reconciliation. The owner's behavior, once unchecked, now responded to the scrutiny and pressure of public awareness. The employees' careful, deliberate actions reflected lessons learned and an understanding of the broader implications of behavior in a connected world. As evening approached, the crowd slowly dispersed, the store returning to a semblance of normalcy. The owner, visibly exhausted, remained outside, speaking quietly to staff and addressing logistical issues. The lessons of the day were clear. Actions have consequences, and prejudice, arrogance, and discrimination can no longer remain hidden. The story had reached its resolution not through confrontation alone, but through the combination of truth, documentation, and public awareness. He walked away from the store, reflecting on the journey from observation to viral exposure, to public accountability, and eventual resolution. The sense of satisfaction he felt was quiet but profound. It was not about revenge or humiliation, but about witnessing the natural course of justice and the power of truth. He understood that standing up against injustice, documenting it, and sharing it responsibly could create real-world consequences that forced reflection, learning, and change. By the time he returned home, the city lights reflected softly on the streets, and the hum of the evening reminded him of the everyday lives continuing around him. He reviewed the footage and notes from the day, understanding that the story had come full circle. The viral post, the public response, and the visible changes in behavior had created a living lesson in accountability. The owner had faced the immediate consequences. Employees had learned the importance of awareness, and the community had witnessed the impact of standing up for what is right. Sitting quietly in his apartment, he felt a deep sense of closure. The journey had started with a personal act of observation, moved through documentation and exposure, and reached its resolution through the visible and tangible effects of accountability. The lessons of the story were clear. Injustice, prejudice, and discrimination cannot remain hidden when met with truth and public awareness. Actions have consequences, and even the smallest act of standing up for fairness can ripple outward, creating real change in the world. He reflected on the human aspects of the story, the anxiety, tension, embarrassment, and reflection experienced by all involved. He saw the power of courage, awareness, and documentation in effecting change. The city outside continued to move, life carried on, but the lessons of the events lingered, a quiet reminder that standing up for justice can lead to accountability, awareness, and ultimately, transformation. The story had concluded, but the impact would continue, inspiring reflection and action beyond the walls of a single designer store.